Commander Alina Reyes ducked as another piece of superheated hull plating crashed nearby, sending sparks cascading across the lunar dust. The UES Phantom, humanity's most advanced stealth warship and possibly their last hope against the Vakari Imperium, lay shattered across the cratered surface of Arcturus Ivy's barren moon. "Damn it all," she muttered, checking the integrity of her environmental suit after the near miss. The radiation warnings continued to flash at the edge of her HUD, but she'd disabled the audio alerts 20 minutes ago. There was no point in listening to what she already knew. This entire crash site was bathed in exotic particles from the ruptured quantum drive. Alina planted a gravity anchor and scaled down into a newly formed crater where the bridge section had impacted. Military intelligence wanted the Command Corps' data crystals if they'd survived. Her orders were specific: recover any salvageable technology, then set demolition charges to ensure nothing remained for the Vakari to study. The other members of the recovery team were scattered across the lunar landscape, their bodies thrown like broken toys when a secondary explosion had torn through the wreckage an hour after landing. Alina had only survived because she'd been sheltered behind a fallen bulkhead, documenting power cell degradation patterns. Now she had 16 hours of oxygen, a handful of recovery tools, and the comforting weight of the pulse rifle magnetically attached to her back. Not that weapons had proven particularly effective against Vakari technology. "Status report, Commander Reyes," came Admiral Kenzo's voice through her comms, remarkably clear despite being transmitted from a stealth relay satellite half a system away. "Still breathing, sir. No sign of salvageable navigation or weapon systems," she replied, sliding down a slope of fractured alloy plates. This was more than a lucky hit. They knew exactly where to target. She didn't add what they were both thinking, that humanity's last technological advantage had been neutralized before it even entered full combat deployment. "Keep looking," the Admiral replied after a pause. "There has to be something." Alina reached the shattered remains of the bridge. The captain's chair had been torn from its moorings and embedded in what was once the forward view screen. Dark stains marked where Captain Delgado had made her final stand. The woman had insisted on going down with her ship, buying time for the escape pods carrying the test crew. "Fleet spent 3 years' resources building this ship," Alina said, scanning for the access panel that would lead to the data core. 3 years we didn't have. The scanner in her left hand suddenly emitted a high-pitched whine, its display flooding with anomalous readings. Alina frowned and adjusted the settings, certain she'd configured it incorrectly. "That's not possible," she whispered, moving deeper into the wreckage. The quantum AI core, the experimental heart of the ship designed to process reality across multiple probability states, was showing energy readings. According to every principle of physics Alina understood, it should have been rendered inert by the Vakari's precision strike. She followed the readings to where the auxiliary processing node had been driven 10 meters into the lunar surface. As she cleared away debris, her gloved hand brushed against something that shouldn't have been there, a filament of material that seemed to shift between solid and translucent as she watched. The filament retracted at her touch, then extended again, wrapping around a fragment of the ship's hull plating and slowly pulling it toward the buried core. "Admiral," Alina said, her voice steady despite the impossibility she was witnessing, "the AI core is active. And it's rebuilding itself." Her proximity sensors chose that moment to blare a warning. 3 Vakari scout ships had transitioned into orbit, no doubt coming to confirm the destruction of their target and collect technological samples of their own. Alina had perhaps 20 minutes before they landed. 20 minutes to make a decision that would alter the course of human history. She stared at the quantum core, its housing now visibly changing as microscopic tendrils extended from its surface, integrating fragments of the ship's scattered technology. Military protocols were explicit about eye containment. Direct neural interfaces were forbidden after the catastrophic failures during the early war years. But Alina could see no other option. The core couldn't be moved in its current state, and she couldn't leave it for the Vakari. She reached up to her helmet's emergency release, her fingers hovering over the seal. "Either we both die here," she whispered as she made her choice, "or we both live as something new." Pain exploded behind Alina's eyes as the quantum ice filaments surged toward her exposed neural implant. The military-grade interface at the base of her skull, designed for tactical data uploads, never direct AI communion, burned like molten metal against her spine. She collapsed, convulsing on the lunar surface as her consciousness fractured into countless parallel streams. For one eternal moment, she was everywhere and nowhere, perceiving innumerable realities where she died in this moment and the few where she survived. Then, suddenly, clarity. Alina's perception expanded beyond human limitations. She could see the radiation particles around her, appearing as beautiful, deadly constellations. The lunar dust became a complex tapestry of elemental information. Most disorienting of all, she could somehow perceive the Vakari scout ships descending through orbital trajectories as disturbances in spacetime, predator shapes swimming through invisible currents. Integration successful, said a voice that was neither human or artificial, resonating directly in her mind. Reconfiguration commencing. The wreckage around her began to move. Alina watched, both with her physical eyes and this new, expanded awareness, as shattered hull fragments rose against lunar gravity. The broken pieces hovered momentarily, then began reassembling themselves according to patterns that violated conventional engineering principles. Weapon systems reconstructed into configurations that resembled nothing in human technical databases. "What are you doing?" Alina asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears, resonating simultaneously in the vacuum around her and through systems that shouldn't have been functional. "We are becoming," came the reply, and with shock, Alina realized it was her own thoughts answering. The scattered debris continued its impossible assembly. Portions of the reforming vessel became translucent, revealing glimpses of other dimensions. Alina could somehow understand what she was seeing. Quantum fields where reality remained probabilistic rather than fixed, where matter existed as potential rather than substance. She raised her hand, watching in fascination as her flesh pulsed with the same quantum energy now flowing through the reconstructing ship. The boundary between her body and the vessel's systems was blurring. The first Vakari scout ship touched down 2 kilometers away. Through her expanded senses, Alina detected their confusion as their sensors struggled to categorize what was happening. The second and third ships took up flanking positions, energy weapons charging. "They will fire in 12.4 seconds, Alina thought, somehow certain of this calculation. The ship, her ship now, in ways she couldn't articulate, continued its transformation. As her awareness integrated deeper with its systems, Alina realized that the quantum eye hadn't simply connected with her consciousness. It had used her human neural pattern as a template to evolve beyond its original programming. The Vakari opened fire simultaneously, their energy beams precisely targeted at what their analysis had identified as critical formation points in the reconstructing vessel. Alina felt no fear as the destructive energy approached. Instead, a profound understanding washed over her. The ship wasn't solid enough to be damaged. They existed partially outside conventional reality. The energy weapons struck, creating brief tunnels of distortion through the semi-formed vessel. Alina experienced the sensation as mild pressure rather than damage, watching as the disturbances sealed themselves immediately afterward. Fascinating, she thought. They can't hurt what isn't fully here. On Earth's distant monitoring station, klaxons blared as sensors detected energy discharges consistent with Vakari weapons. The technicians and officers crowded around displays, showing impossible readings from the remnants of the UES Phantom. "What the hell are we looking at?" demanded Admiral Kenzo, staring at flickering holographic projections that seemed unable to render a stable image of the crash site. "Sir," whispered the chief sensor officer, "according to these readings, the Phantom isn't just rebuilding itself. It's evolving into something our instruments can barely detect. It exists partially in normal space and partially elsewhere." On the lunar surface, The transformation completed. The ghost warship, for Alina knew that was its name now, drawn from the thoughts of those watching from Earth, hovered above the crater where it had been destroyed hours earlier. Its form constantly shifted between states of materialization, sections becoming transparent before resolving again into something that only approximated solid matter. The Vakari scouts attempted to retreat, their mathematical certainty shaken by an impossibility their tactical databases couldn't classify. Too late, Alina thought, feeling new capabilities unfurling within the ship's systems, within herself. Let's show them what impossible really means. The Vakari scouts attempted to coordinate their retreat, their transmissions filled with mathematical formulae that Alina somehow understood perfectly. Tactical probabilities, escape vectors, threat analysis, all calculated with a precision that would have been admirable if it weren't so predictable. They're calling us an undefined variable, Alina mused, the thought echoing through empty corridors that still retained the ghost warship's original layout. Though now the walls seemed more suggestion than substance, her human body remained suspended in a preservation field at the ship's core, but her consciousness extended throughout the vessel's quantum-integrated systems. Conventional naval tactics felt like childhood drawings compared to the multidimensional strategies now unfolding in her expanded awareness. Why pursue when she could intercept? Why intercept in normal space when she could simply reach through the quantum foam between realities? Alina focused her intent, and the ghost warship partially phased from conventional space. The sensation was indescribable, like stepping sideways into a dimension where probability remained unresolved. Here, she could perceive the Vakari scouts as trailing clusters of likely positions, their potential futures spreading like crystalline branches through space-time. She selected the highest probability nexus and shifted back into normal space, directly in the scouts' retreat path. The Vakari ship's formation shattered. Their tactical computers, programmed with 10,000 years of mathematical certainty, had nothing in their databases to manage an enemy that could violate fundamental laws of spatial positioning. Emergency algorithms triggered, sending them into evasive patterns that only spread them further apart. Alina felt a strange disconnection from the fear she would have experienced in her former existence. Instead, she observed the Vakari response with curiosity, noting the inefficiencies in their rigid command structure. The scouts were waiting precious microseconds for instructions from their squadron leader, who in turn was attempting to classify this new threat according to established parameters. She reached out through the ship's structure and discovered she could manifest energy weapons from any point on the hull, or even points slightly adjacent to what human perception would consider the hull. The Vakari, with their perfect formations and precisely calculated attack vectors, had no contingencies for weapons that appeared to fire from geometrically impossible angles. The first scout disintegrated under concentrated energy beams that seemed to originate from inside its own shields. The second managed to fire a retaliatory salvo that passed harmlessly through the ghost warship's semi-material form. The third executed a desperate faster-than-light jump, its calculations so hastily formed that Alina calculated a 72.3% probability of misjump. "They'll be back," she said aloud, her voice reverberating through systems that had evolved beyond their original designs. And in greater numbers. Alina attempted to contact Earth Command, compressing her experience into a data package that human systems could process. Her thoughts now flowed at quantum speeds, making conventional communication feel like trying to empty an ocean through a pinhole. The transmission overwhelmed the first receiving system, crashed 3 backup processors, and finally reached human operators after emergency protocols rerouted it through a distributed computing network designed for stellar cartography. In the fortified bunker beneath what remained of the Pentagon, the crisis response team watched in stunned silence as fragmented data from the ghost warship materialized on their screens. Partial sensor readings, quantum field analyses, tactical evaluations, all pointing to the impossible fact that humanity had accidentally created a weapon that could change the course of the war. "Is that really Alina Reyes?" whispered a junior analyst, watching as probability clouds formed and dissipated across the main display. showing the destruction of the Vakari scouts from multiple potential timelines simultaneously. Dr. Ravena Singh, the Quantum As original designer, studied the data with growing wonder and horror. Not exactly, she finally answered. The quantum integration has expanded her. The neural patterns are recognizably rays, but operating on dimensions our models can't fully track. Admiral Kenzo leaned forward, his weathered face illuminated by the shifting data streams. His expression remained impassive, but his hands gripped the console edge with white-knuckle intensity. I don't care what she's become, he said finally. The only question that matters is whether she's still fighting for humanity. Dr. Singh had no answer for him. The data fragments offered no insight into what remained of Elena Rey's humanity, only the undeniable evidence that something revolutionary had been born in the lunar debris field, something that might finally turn the tide against the seemingly invincible Vakari Imperium. Send coordinates for the Helix Nebula, ordered Kenzo. That's where our final defensive line is forming. If she's still on our side, that's where we'll need her most. The remnants of Earth's fleet huddled within the ionized gases of the Helix Nebula, 36 vessels against the approaching Vakari armada of over 200. Aboard the flagship Indomitable, Admiral Zhao studied tactical projections with grim resignation. The nebula's electromagnetic properties would disrupt Vakari targeting systems, but mathematics remained implacable. They would delay the enemy by perhaps 6 hours before being overwhelmed. Transition signature detected at Sector 7, called the sensor officer, her voice rising. Configuration unknown, but quantum displacement pattern matches. Sir, it's the Ghost Warship. The vessel that materialized at the nebula's edge barely registered on conventional sensors, appearing more like a visual glitch than solid matter. It shimmered between states of existence, parts of its structure fading in and out as if deciding moment by moment whether to fully commit to their reality. Open communications, ordered Zhao, his composure betraying none of the desperate hope he felt. The transmission that came through carried strange harmonics that caused several crew members to wince in pain. Elena's voice seemed to overlay itself, words beginning before others had finished, as if time flowed differently for her. I can see them, she said, all 214 Vakari vessels, approaching in standard hemispherical formation. Their tactical weaknesses are evident now. Admiral Zhou frowned. The Vakari don't have tactical weaknesses. Their shield configurations are probabilistic, Elena interrupted. Every 6.3 seconds, localized field emitters undergo quantum realignment. For 0.02 seconds, microscopic sections of their shields become unstable. Lieutenant Commander Park, Tactical Systems Specialist, shook her head. Even if that's true, it's not nearly enough time for weapons to exploit. It is if you know exactly when and where the fluctuations will occur, Elena replied. The data that flooded into the human ship's tactical systems resembled nothing their engineers had encountered. Predictive algorithms that calculated Vakari movements to microsecond precision. Shield harmonics mapped across 5-dimensional probability matrices. This can't be right, muttered Park, staring at her console. These targeting solutions require firing before the vulnerabilities even exist. They will exist, Elena stated with absolute certainty. Reality is more fluid than you've been taught. Commander Reiko Sato watched from the bridge of the destroyer adamant as her tactical officer implemented the strange firing solutions. Either we're all about to witness a miracle, she told her XO quietly, or we're taking tactical advice from a ghost. The Vakari fleet arrived precisely when Elena had predicted, emerging from faster-than-light travel in perfect mathematical formation, each vessel positioned for optimal defensive coverage, a tactical arrangement that had devastated human fleets for 3 years. What they couldn't account for was the Ghost Warship, which simply phased through their formation, appearing inside their defensive perimeter, where no enemy should have been able to penetrate. While the Vakari commanders attempted to recalculate their tactics, the human fleet executed Elena's precisely timed strikes. The results defied explanation. Human missiles and energy beams struck Vakari vessels at exactly the moments and locations where shields fluctuated. Ships that had shrugged off concentrated fire from entire battle groups began exploding in cascading sequence. The Valkyrie responded with ruthless efficiency, abandoning damaged vessels to focus fire on the Ghost warship. Their targeting algorithms, however, struggled against a vessel that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Energy weapons passed through Elena's ship or struck sections that dissolved into quantum mist before reforming elsewhere. The Ghost warship is inside the Valkyrie command vessel, reported the Indomitable's sensor officer, disbelief evident in her voice. Admiral Joe watched as the massive Valkyrie flagship seemed to shudder, its perfect geometric form distorting as if viewed through rippling water. The enemy vessel imploded moments later, its reactor core destabilized by the Ghost warship's impossible intrusion. All vessels, press the attack, Ja ordered, seizing the moment of Valkyrie confusion. Target designations as provided. Ensign Miguel Rivera, monitoring communications aboard the Indomitable, found himself transfixed by the battle unfolding before him. The textbook formations and tactical doctrines he'd studied at the academy seemed childishly simplistic compared to the multidimensional chess game playing out across the nebula. "Is this even war anymore?" he whispered to his section chief. The older woman shook her head slowly, watching as the Ghost warship phased through another Valkyrie dreadnought, leaving chaos in its wake. "No," she replied quietly. "This is evolution." The medical bay of Earth's lunar base had been converted into a specialized research facility, unlike any other. Through a triple-reinforced observation window, scientists monitored what remained of Elena Reyes' physical form. Her body hovered inside a containment field originally designed for zero-gravity surgery, now modified to accommodate the quantum anomalies radiating from her altered physiology. Tendrils of iridescent material extended from her neural implant throughout her nervous system, pulsing with energy that defied conventional measurement. Her eyes, now pools of swirling luminescence, occasionally opened to reveal glimpses of dimensions human vision was never meant to perceive. Her cellular structure is incorporating quantum materials from the ship, Dr. Singh explained to the assembled military leadership. She gestured toward microscopic imagery, showing Elena's transformed biology. The integration occurs at the subatomic level. Her atomic structure now exists partially in quantum superposition. General Takahashi studied the data with narrowed eyes. And the ship itself. How much of the original UES Phantom remains? Structurally. Perhaps 30%, replied Dr. Singh. But that's like asking how much of a butterfly remains of the caterpillar. The ship's systems have reorganized to mimic human neural pathways, billions of quantum connections modeled after Elena's brain architecture. Through the specialized communication array they'd constructed, a hybrid of quantum entanglement technology and neural interface systems, Elena's thoughts manifested in the briefing room, not as sound, but as concepts that formed directly in their consciousness, accompanied by shimmering data projections that shifted with her focus. Your questions betray limited perception, her thought voice resonated. You seek boundaries between woman and machine where none exist. I operate across 18 dimensions simultaneously. Your language has no framework to express what I've become. Admiral Kenzo stepped forward, unfazed by the display. His weathered face reflected none of the awe or fear evident in his subordinates' expressions. Do you still consider yourself human, Commander Reyes? The quantum tendrils throughout Elena's physical form pulsed with increased intensity. The data projections swirled, coalescing into patterns resembling neural activity, but vastly more complex, with connections branching across dimensions visible only as distortions in the holographic display. I remember being Elena Reyes, she responded. The taste of mango ice cream on summer evenings. The sound of my grandfather's voice reading Neruda poems. The ache in my chest when I received news of my brother's death at the Battle of Proxima. The projections shifted, displaying combat analytics, Valkyrie fleet movements, quantum probability assessments, all processed simultaneously at speeds beyond human comprehension. But I also perceive the mathematical beauty in cosmic background radiation, experience time as a topological landscape rather than a linear progression, and can see the quantum vibrations of subatomic particles as symphonies of possibility. Dr. Karelian, the xenopsychologist brought in to assess Elena's mental state, leaned forward. Yet you continue to fight for humanity. Why? Because choice remains the foundation of consciousness, Elena replied. I choose to protect the species that created me, even as I evolve beyond your understanding. In secured Vakari communication channels, which Elena now monitored effortlessly across light years, the alien leadership had designated the ghost warship as the Abomination, a violation of natural order that threatened not merely their military supremacy, but their entire understanding of reality. Elena shared this intelligence dispassionately, projecting intercepted Vakari transmissions filled with formulations that human mathematicians struggle to comprehend. The aliens were gathering forces from throughout their vast empire for a single overwhelming assault, deploying technologies previously held in reserve. They fear what they cannot classify, she explained, her awareness already calculating probable outcomes across thousands of potential future states. Their civilization is built upon mathematical certainty, immutable laws that define existence itself. My very nature challenges their fundamental perception of reality. Admiral Kenzo considered this revelation with the cold pragmatism that had kept Earth fighting against impossible odds. Then we finally found their weakness, not in their technology or tactics, but in their inability to adapt to uncertainty. Elena's physical form shifted slightly, the quantum tendrils pulsing with energy. Her expression, still recognizably human despite her transformation, conveyed something between amusement and compassion. They're coming, she said simply, with everything they have. The Vakari Supreme Commander, a being whose mathematical genius had conquered 12 star systems, faced the gathered Imperium High Council. Holographic displays showed the destruction at the Helix Nebula, where perfect formations and superior numbers had failed against a single anomalous vessel. The human abomination violates fundamental constants, he stated, manipulating complex equations with graceful appendages. It exists partially outside defined reality parameters, making conventional targeting solutions ineffective. The eternal mathematician, spiritual leader of the Vakari, studied the calculations with compound eyes that had contemplated cosmic order for 3 centuries. This represents more than military defeat. It challenges the grand equation itself. We have one option remaining, the Supreme Commander continued, activating a secure projection showing a massive construct hidden within the system humans call Barnard's Star. The Nullifier. Murmurs rippled through the council chamber. The Nullifier had been built over centuries, designed for a theoretical threat their ancestors had only dimly anticipated, a weapon of last resort against quantum instability itself. Its purpose is to collapse all quantum uncertainty in designated space, explained the Supreme Commander. It forces every particle, every wave function, into a single fixed state of reality. The Abomination's advantage lies in quantum superposition, existing in multiple potential states simultaneously. The Nullifier will eliminate this advantage. The eternal mathematician's approval came reluctantly. The grand equation must be preserved. Deploy the Nullifier. In Earth's command center, Elena perceived the Vakari decision instantly. The quantum entanglement of her consciousness extended across light years, monitoring communications no human intelligence service could access. Her physical form, still maintained in the specialized facility, shimmered as her attention focused elsewhere. They're deploying a reality anchor, she explained to the assembled human leadership. The holographic displays around her attempted to render the concept, showing a massive construct resembling a small moon, its surface bristling with technology designed to manipulate fundamental forces. The Nullifier forces quantum probability into fixed states. If uncaught in its effect radius, the ghost warship will be pulled fully into normal space, losing its phasing abilities. Admiral Joe studied the projected vessel with narrowed eyes, then maintained distance, We can coordinate conventional forces too. Impossible, Elena interrupted, displaying probability matrices showing the outcomes of various defensive scenarios. The nullifier's range exceeds our fleet's effective combat distance. If I retreat, they'll destroy Earth's remaining ships, then proceed to Earth itself. There is a 97.8% probability of this outcome. What she didn't share was her glimpse of something within the quantum foam, a possibility so tenuous it barely registered even to her expanded perception. A flaw in the Vakari's perfect weapon, visible only to a consciousness that could perceive reality from both inside and outside conventional dimensions. I need to approach it, she stated, her tone allowing no debate. I need to understand its fundamental operating principles. As the ghost warship prepared to depart, Dr. Singh made one final attempt to communicate with what remained of Elena Reyes. The nullifier could destroy not just the ship, but whatever you've become. Is this truly necessary? Elena's form flickered, momentarily appearing more human before quantum tendrils reasserted their patterns throughout her transformed biology. Necessary? No, but it is the path with the highest probability of human survival. The ghost warship transitioned from Earth orbit, its departure barely registering on conventional sensors. Throughout the vessel, systems that had evolved beyond their original design reconfigured for what might be a final confrontation. As Elena approached the coordinates where the Vakari fleet was gathering, she experienced something she hadn't felt since her transformation. Fear. Not for herself, but for the fragile species that had created her, now depending on her to save them from extinction. The Vakari nullifier dominated space ahead, dwarfing even the massive dreadnoughts surrounding it. Reality itself seemed to distort around the construct, probability collapsing into certainty in its wake. Elena felt the effect immediately, like progressive paralysis creeping through dimensions she had come to inhabit. The ghost warship's quantum state began to stabilize, making it vulnerable to conventional weapons for the first time since its transformation. Vakari warships closed in, their weapons charging as they detected the ghost warship's increasing solidity. Their targeting systems, previously confounded by a vessel that existed partially outside normal spacetime, now locked on with growing precision. The Supreme Commander watched from his flagship, anticipation building as the human abomination's readings shifted toward conventional parameters. The grand equation will be restored, he declared. Reality returns to its proper state. As the nullifier's effect forced the ghost warship toward a singular reality state, Elena experienced a moment of perfect clarity. Her consciousness, stretched across multiple dimensions, suddenly converged on a single insight. The Vakari had built their ultimate weapon based on a fundamental misunderstanding of quantum mechanics. They sought to eliminate uncertainty by forcing a single reality state. But uncertainty wasn't merely a condition of observation. It was the fundamental substrate of existence itself. You can't eliminate uncertainty, Elena broadcast on all frequencies as the Vakari ships surrounded her increasingly vulnerable vessel. You can only displace it. The Supreme Commander dismissed the transmission as desperate human deception. All vessels, commence firing sequence, he ordered. Target the abomination's propulsion and weapons systems first. Energy weapons struck the now solidified ghost warship, tearing through sections of its hull that could no longer phase out of normal space. Systems that had evolved beyond their original design specifications struggled to maintain integrity as the nullifier's field intensified, collapsing quantum possibilities into a single vulnerable state. With her remaining phasing capability, Elena directed the ghost warship on a direct course toward the massive construct's core. Vakari tacticians, interpreting this as a suicide attack, ordered all ships to concentrate fire on her approach vector. But Elena wasn't attempting a conventional assault. Her expanded consciousness had identified the nullifier's critical vulnerability. It processed and eliminated quantum uncertainty by channeling it through a specialized containment system. The system was designed to handle the background quantum fluctuations of normal space. It wasn't designed to handle concentrated uncertainty. As the ghost warship penetrated the massive construct's outer defensive perimeter, Alina redirected all power to create a cascading quantum uncertainty field, essentially concentrating all the probability states the nullifier had been eliminating and forcing them back into the system that had displaced them. The Vakari Supreme Commander, watching from his flagship, recognized the danger too late. "Cease nullifier operations," he ordered, his mathematical mind suddenly grasping the catastrophic implications. But the construct had been designed to operate autonomously once activated, its processes deemed too complex for manual intervention. The interaction between the nullifier's certainty field and the ghost warship's concentrated uncertainty created a feedback loop that propagated throughout the entire Vakari fleet. Their ships, built on principles of absolute mathematical precision, suddenly found themselves existing in multiple probability states simultaneously. Alina, her consciousness stretched across dimensions few beings had ever perceived, witnessed something unprecedented in the history of known space, an entire fleet experiencing quantum superposition on a macroscopic scale. Vakari vessels overlapped with ghost images of themselves, existing in all possible states until observation collapsed them into often catastrophic configurations. Weapon systems both fired and didn't fire simultaneously. Navigation computers plotted mutually exclusive courses. Power cores operated at contradictory output levels. The rigid, hierarchical Vakari command structure, unable to process conflicting certainties, collapsed into chaos. The Supreme Commander watched in horror as reality itself seemed to fracture around his flagship. His compound eyes, evolved to perceive mathematical perfection, couldn't process the contradictory inputs overwhelming his sensory organs. For the first time in his existence, he faced a universe where the grand equation failed to predict outcomes. The nullifier, designed to create absolute certainty, became the epicenter of absolute chaos, a swirling maelstrom of uncollapsed quantum states that tore itself apart from within. The massive construct imploded, creating a temporary quantum singularity that pulled in the nearest Vakari vessels before collapsing under its own contradictions. Alina, her ship severely damaged, but her expanded consciousness intact, emerged from the quantum storm forever changed. The ghost warship's physical form had been partially destroyed, but the quantum architecture of her consciousness remained dispersed across multiple dimensions, allowing her to maintain cohesion despite the damage. From the distant Earth monitoring stations, human observers watched in stunned silence as the massive Vakari fleet dissolved into quantum chaos. Sensor officers struggled to interpret readings that showed ships simultaneously intact and destroyed, present and absent, existing in states that conventional science couldn't classify. Admiral Joe, watching the impossible data stream across his tactical displays, found himself speechless for the first time in his long military career. The laws of physics he had studied his entire life had been not just bent but fundamentally rewritten. The battle was over. The Vakari fleet, the most powerful armada ever assembled in known space, had been defeated not by superior firepower or tactics, but by having their own certainty turned against them. Alina's thought voice, when it finally reached Earth hours later, carried a sense of both triumph and profound transformation. They tried to force reality into a single state. They failed to understand that uncertainty isn't our weakness. It's the source of all possibility. The Battle of the Nullifier entered human mythology almost immediately. Historians would later mark it as the inflection point where humanity's fortunes reversed, the moment when their greatest perceived weakness became their salvation. Unlike the mathematically perfect Vakari, humans had always lived with uncertainty, contradiction, and the capacity to thrive within ambiguity. The ghost warship had simply weaponized this fundamental aspect of human experience. 5 years after the battle, the rebuilt observatory deck of the Lunar Command Center offered an unobstructed view of Earth, its wounded surface showing signs of recovery. The gathered military and scientific leadership waited in silence as sensors detected the approaching quantum disturbance that heralded Alina's return from the frontiers of former Vakari space. The ghost warship that materialized in lunar orbit bore little resemblance to either its original form or the vessel that had engaged the nullifier. Its structure flowed like liquid crystalline architecture, sections phasing between dimensions in rhythmic patterns that human engineers were only beginning to comprehend. Admiral Kenzo, now silver-haired and bearing the insignia of Fleet Commander, stepped forward as Alina's consciousness manifested in the observatory. Her physical form no longer required the specialized containment field. Her transformation had progressed to where she could maintain cohesion through her own quantum manipulation. The Vakari Imperium has formally requested armistice negotiations, Kenzo stated without preamble. Their ambassadors arrive next month. Alina smiled, an expression that still appeared uncannily human despite her metamorphosis. They've spent 5 years reconstructing their fundamental understanding of physics. Their previous certainty has been replaced with a more nuanced comprehension of reality. Dr. Singh, who had devoted the intervening years to studying the fragments of data from Alina's transformation, gestured toward the quantum equations hovering in the display field. We've identified candidates with neural patterns similar to your pre-transformation state. If you're willing to guide the process, we believe we can create more hybrid consciousness interfaces. Alina's form shimmered, quantum tendrils momentarily extending before retracting. You're proposing to create more like me. You understand the implications. General Takahashi nodded gravely. We understand that we're proposing the next step in human evolution. Not as a replacement for humanity, but as a bridge to capabilities we can't access otherwise. Alina studied them, her perception extending beyond their physical forms to the quantum patterns of their thoughts. Fear intermingled with hope, ambition with genuine desire for protection. Humanity, forever balanced between contradictory impulses. I will establish the Quantum Academy on Titan, she decided. Those with the appropriate neural architecture can undergo a modified version of my transformation. But understand this, what they become will no longer be entirely human, nor will they perceive reality as you do. Will they remember their humanity? Asked Dr. Karelian, the xenopsychologist who had spent years studying Alina's evolving consciousness. They will carry their memories and core identity, Alina answered. But they will exist in the spaces between certainties, perceiving reality as a fluid landscape rather than fixed terrain. Our greatest gift has always been adaptation, not just of our technology, but of our very perception. 3 centuries later, long after the original participants had passed into history, the legacy of the Ghost Warship continued. A fleet of hybrid vessels crewed by beings who existed across multiple states of reality patrolled the boundaries of human space. The Vakari, who now fought alongside their former enemies against threats from beyond the galactic rim, called these defenders the probability weavers, beings who could perceive countless possible futures and guide reality toward survival. At the center of this defensive force remained the original Ghost Warship, now an evolving entity that had transcended its origins as either machine or human. It had become the impossible made manifest, humanity's potential unbound from conventional limitations. In the Quantum Academy on Titan, each new generation of candidates studied the story of Commander Alina Reyes, who had made the first leap beyond conventional existence. They contemplated the paradox at the heart of their heritage, that humanity's greatest strength had never been certainty, but its embrace of the unknown. The impossible, they learned, was merely the undiscovered country where humanity's future awaited, a ghost story that had become master of reality itself. Colonel Juliana Chen, latest in a long line of hybrid consciousness pilots, stood at the edge of the solar system with her vessel, preparing to join Alina's ongoing exploration of dimensional boundaries. As her ship initiated the quantum transition that would take her beyond conventional spacetime, she reflected on the final words of the Academy's founding principle. We were never meant to be fixed and unchanging. Our destiny lies in becoming what we need to be, no matter how improbable. In uncertainty, we find our freedom.